Now, for more on the elections and what the future holds for South Korea and its economy, I'm joined by Troy Stangarone. He's a Senior Director for Congressional Affairs and Trade for the Korea Economic Institute. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you.
Now, with the impeachment of ousted President Park Geun-hye, it's still fresh on the minds of voters. How critical are these elections, not just for South Korea, but the economy as well?
I think this is very critical. If you look at South Korea, the economy has been tailing off. Trade over the last few years has been declining, though it's been up in recent months. We have a situation to where South Korea is hitting a demographic crisis. The working age population is declining. They need to do social reforms in terms of welfare for the retired. They have the highest level of old age poverty. There are a lot of economic issues the next president is going to have to address for the long-term future of South Korea.
Now, what about from the voters' perspective? What are the economic issues that are most pressing for them?
Right now, you're talking about youth unemployment. South Korea has one of the highest levels of youth unemployment in the region. It's at about 10%, which is about 4 times as high as regular unemployment. You have a situation in South Korea right now to where some of the economy is picking up, like semiconductors, but much of the economy is not taking place. But labor market reform is really the key here because you have a stratified system to where some workers only make about 30% of what people in the chaebol actually make. So without reforms to the labor market, without reforms to the chaebol, it's going to be really hard to improve growth.
Now, it's certainly a very crowded candidate pool you've got there. So how realistic are their economic visions for South Korea?
I think to an extent, you've seen Moon Jae-in, who's the leader, sort of try to tail some of this back. Chaebol reform, he's talked about things to the extent of reforming the FTC, having like the National Pension Service be more independent in terms of taking in when they have mergers come forward in the chaebol, being able to vote their own way. So sort of things around the margins right there. Everyone is in favor of greater transparency. These are all things that I think are doable. The bigger challenge is going to be implementing reforms that he suggested, such as taking and creating 810,000 public sector jobs, which could be difficult.
Now, obviously, this election is also taking place amid growing tensions with the DPRK. How much is that weighing on the election?
You know, it's always going to be a factor, but at the end of the day, this election is really going down to corruption, the impeachment, and the economy, and those are the kinds of issues that you would expect in most elections. North Korea is something that South Koreans live with every day. They've sort of become used to, so for them, this is about the domestic issues.
So more so normalized, being that they have ongoing issues with the DPRK. Now let's look at other countries in the region, especially China. How are they viewing what's happening with the election?
I think China's watching this very carefully. China's been very clear that they are not pleased with the deployment of the THAAD missile defense system. I think they're hoping that perhaps a candidate who might be more amenable to their position might come into power. But I think this is something that's going to probably be settled. But at the end of the day, China and South Korea are important economic partners for each other, both in terms of investment and trade. And so I think they need a good relationship with each other.
Now, obviously, you've talked about a number of issues: corruption, youth unemployment, tensions with the DPRK. How is that affecting the business and investment landscape in Korea?
You've seen a little bit of a tail-off in the markets in terms of rates going up. There is some concerns in terms of the uncertainty, but I think a lot of this will smooth out. The bigger issue is going to be, are the chaebols going to be able to continue to perform? Will they be able to take and introduce reforms that will expand growth? And I think, we're just seeing a slight blip in the market right now.
Now, depending on who wins, how could a potential rethink of the South Korea-US dynamic affect the economy?
Well, this is an interesting situation. You have President Trump, who has a policy on North Korea of maximum pressure and engagement. You have Moon Jae-in, who is the leader, but even beyond him, Ahn Cheol-soo, if he were to win, are both looking at some type of more engagement with North Korea. I think, practically speaking, they both understand the value of the alliance, and I think we're likely to see them sit down with President Trump and talk about ways that they can take and find a way to engage the North while we're also applying pressure to try and have both sides of that policy going forward.
And when it comes to really restarting the engines of growth in South Korea, if you could wave a magic wand and have at least 2 or 3 reforms that you think should really be the priority, what would they be?
I think first I'd start off with labor market reform. Really right now, it's for the youth, if you don't get into one of those chaebol jobs right away, you end up stuck in this temporary job market, which really undermines your career. So if you think about the long-term prospects for both the young and for being able to move the economy forward, this is the key. The other thing I think I'd really do is you need structural reform. You have overcapacity in shipping, you have overcapacity in shipbuilding, you have overcapacity in steel. You need to take and sort of restructure these industries so that way you can have growth going forward.
Well, the next president certainly has their hands full. Thank you so much, Troy Stangarone, joining us from the Korea Economic Institute.